just to say thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm very mindful that, you've all been on a big journey together. We're coming, to the end of that journey. And I think one of my briefs is to offer some thoughts for the way ahead. I just want to say that, I've enjoyed many experiences with Academy Wales over the years, with the winter school and the summer school. So I can only imagine and trust that you have had a wonderful experience. And I'm always very thrilled when I get an email in my inbox saying, would you like to participate in this one? My brief in particular this time is to talk to you about leadership using a model called the Enneagram. And I just wanted to see first and foremost how many of you will have heard of the Enneagram. And I'm just trying to make sure that I get to see everybody's faces. And I think I've got quite a lot of you here, but could I maybe just see some hands? Is there anybody who's come across the Enneagram before? That would be helpful to know. So looks like it's a bit new for a lot of people. Okay. What I would like to do very much is I'm going to introduce you to the Enneagram so that we can focus on leadership. And I invite you really just to ask me questions as we go. So if there's any occasion where you have a question, I'll be looking out for a raised hand or a message in the chat. All right, so let's take a little look at the Enneagram. So now the actual Enneagram model is really the white circle in the middle with these 9 points on it and these lines. So that's what we're looking at first here. And essentially, there are, I think, just if I say a little bit about the Enneagram first and foremost, it's considered to be one of the oldest self-awareness tools on the planet. So around about 2,500 years old. Enneagram is a Greek compound word. Ennea means 9 and gramma means something written. So this is essentially a model of 9. It's full of mathematics, geometry, and what Plato would call natural law. And a lot of it has to do with numbers 0, 1, 3, represented by the triangle, 7, which is what these other lines join the number 7 together, and then also 9 as well. The history of the Enneagram is very mysterious, really. It's mostly a paperless trail, an oral tradition. We absolutely are dealing with Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, but also we have links to more of the Sufi traditions of Persia and many other traditions actually as well. So we don't know who created it, but it has been in existence for a long time. Now, there was a particular gentleman called Mr. Ouspensky, a Russian philosopher who traveled through Europe, India, Egypt, in search of ancient knowledge. He was a little bit like an Indiana Jones character. And in 1915, he met a character called Gurdjieff in Moscow. And he studied with Gurdjieff for 10 years. And he recounted his tales in a book written in 1949 called In Search of the Miraculous. Mr. Gurdjieff is a rather enigmatic character, and he was the one who introduced Ouspensky to the Enneagram. And I'm going to give you a quote now from the book. And this is what Gurdjieff said to Ouspensky. He said, "A man may be quite alone in the desert, and he can trace the Enneagram in the sand and in it read the eternal laws of the universe. And every time he can learn something new, something he did not know before. So that's rather interesting, to say the least, and normally stimulates a bit of curiosity. There are three broad ways to work with the Enneagram. One way is what's called the Enneagram of personality. So the 9 types on the Enneagram, represented by those 9 numbers, if you like, are to do with your personality. And you can take a test, and you would then work out possibly the number for the operating system of your personality. So just to be really clear, because this is quite important, my background, by the way, is in psychology and philosophy, and I've studied many of these types of tests or models, and a lot of them are keen to define you, and quite frankly, we're undefinable. We're not really very typable as humans. We don't know enough about ourselves really yet. So to type ourselves is a bit of to say that this number is your identity would be a bit too much. But what we can say is that this number is pointing to the operating system of your ego, some of your default ways of being. The way you think, the way you relate, the way you behave. A lot of this is to do with your autopilot. And it's very, very helpful, of course, to have an autopilot and to have some habits. And yet, if you're on a journey of growth, and I would suggest that leadership is always a journey of growth, the way you're being asked to lead this year won't be exactly the same as how you were being asked to lead last year. That's even easier to say these days when we're in the middle still of a pandemic. We can never really just use our old winning formulas from the past and hope there'll be enough for the present. We have to be willing to grow. And in order to do that, we have to be able to look at some of our autopilots and our habits and question those. Another way of looking at the Enneagram, rather than just typing, is to see it as a path of growth with some wonderful opportunities for insights and growth. And there are lots of ways to do that with the Enneagram. I have to be brief, so I'll just leave it at there. But another way of looking at the Enneagram is to say that it's like a mandala for meditation. So these 9 numbers on the Enneagram can become 9 meditation seats where you would want to sit for a while and contemplate a subject from this different angle, 9 different angles. And so for that reason, we can use the Enneagram to look at something like leadership and see if it might be able to be of help to us and give us a different focus on how we can work with leadership. A lot of my work is working with leadership in the Enneagram these days, and with all sorts of organizations, like a Unilever or an IBM or Google or Facebook or a theatre group or or a school. Or a publishing company, for example. So very varied. But we can also use the Enneagram to look at, for instance, happiness in the Enneagram, or relationships in the Enneagram, parenting in the Enneagram, how your parenting style would be, and then your child's outlook and what sort of a match that is, purpose in the Enneagram, spiritual growth in the Enneagram could be one. The next program I'm running publicly is a program called Love in the Enneagram, looking at love through, but working with the lens of the Enneagram. So for today, we're going to take a little look at leadership. Now, just one way to get going normally with the Enneagram is to take some sort of a test. And just to give you a little bit of a flavor of how this might work, for example, if you were a type 1 on the Enneagram, which is sometimes called the Perfectionist or the Reformer, if you were taking a test, you'd probably want to try to get it right. You'll want to be a good student. You'll want to do it properly, and you'll be wondering if there's some sort of a perfect score, potentially. At point 2, or type 2, you're the helper. So whilst you're taking the Enneagram test, you're probably finding it very interesting, but it's also, you're really thinking about, who else could benefit from the Enneagram test? In fact, you may even be tempted to pass on the test and everything to do with the Enneagram to others before you've even really taken it yourself. Type 3, the achiever. You're going to give it your best shot. You're probably going to want to look your best, and you want to know, is this, am I the best type? Is there even a best type? And the answer to that is no, there's not. There's not a best type. If you're an individualist, type 4, as you're going down around the Enneagram, most individualists are not sure they like the idea of the Enneagram. They're working hard to be individualists, so they don't want a model that's going to type them. This is the type that might think, I'm not a type. I'm a unicorn. I'm something else. And I don't want to be typed. And the Enneagram would probably say, actually, yeah, well, you're quite right to not be typed, because, as I say, we can't really be typed, but we can get to understand ourselves better, and that's important. Type 5s are called the Investigator. And this is the type that before you do the test, you'll probably want to Google the Enneagram. You might even buy some books, watch some YouTube videos, maybe cross-reference the Enneagram against some other tests. And when people ask you, have you done any research into the Enneagram, you'll probably say not much, but the chances are you'll have done more than everybody else. Type 6 are called the Loyalists. And these they're also sometimes referred to as the skeptic. This is the type that filters the world through skepticism most often, and so therefore they're a little bit cautious about these sorts of tests. And indeed, they're concerned that they're going to end up with one of the worst types potentially. Type 7 is called the Enthusiast. The Enthusiast has a tendency for wanting lots and lots of choices, and so it's very common for type 7s to not want to be just one type. They might want to be a few types, actually. They're often the quickest to take the test. They have a lot of enthusiasm. If there's an option between a short test and a longer test, they'll probably want to take the short test. It's like, let's just get on with it. Type 8s are called the Challenger. The Challenger, their learning style is rather interesting in that they want to be, they will challenge you to come up with something good. So when they look at the Enneagram, as far as they're concerned, they're going to be challenging the Enneagram to be good. And if it's not good, and you don't get too many chances with challenges normally, then it will be dismissed pretty quickly. Type 9 is called the Peacemaker. And this is a type that often likes to do things at their own pace. So they may well get around to doing the Enneagram eventually. So I'm just giving you a little flavor for now, okay, how these things work. Today in particular, I do want to just acknowledge that I do think leadership is this path of growth that we all sign up for. And actually that for the most part, I think that getting promoted into leadership positions requires some sort of a skill set for sure, but actually being in the leadership position often requires a bit more than the skill set that got you into the leadership in the first place. I don't think leadership is just a position. I think it's more to do with a way of being. And because of that, it becomes really clear after a while that it's really vital to think about how you show up. anybody who takes on a leadership position, I think at some point realizes, my goodness, I really do have a bit of an influence around here, and it's pretty vital that I think carefully about how I show up. I remember one time working with somebody one-to-one. It was their first leadership position where they were actually working with people. Before then, it was not so much to do with or let's just say it was a team. It was their very own team. Before that, they were in a matrix setup where they didn't have to manage a team. This was before COVID. But in one of our sessions, he said to me, "I've worked out that I am the weather in my office." I've always remembered that. I am the weather in my office. The way I show up determines what the weather is going to be like in the office, in large part. All right, so we are going to go into the Enneagram now. We're going to take a little look at each of the points, and I'm going to do like a little brief summary of them. And I'm going to pause at the end of each one and ask some, and just give you that space to be able to make a comment or ask any questions. And let's now take a little look at our first type. And I'm going to start at point 1. Point 1 is called often the reformer. Other names are the perfectionist, the mentor, the educator, the activist, and also the idealist. The number for each type suggests really points to two things. One, a life outlook, and the second one is a social role. Okay, life outlook, social role. The life outlook normally for the reformer is essentially it's to live a good life. There is a keen focus on identifying the highest good and the greater good. Yeah, working for the greater good. The social role that the type 1 takes is normally the good person. As a child, they will have often been the good child in the family. Their driver is a be perfect driver. And all of this is very, very good, except when it creates strain, if you like, on your own psyche. They tend to be visionary, conscientious, have high standards, be service-minded, be thinking very much about a legacy. They're often very stoic as well. Examples of a type 1 leader would be something like a Gandhi, leading by example, be the change you want to see in the world. Or a Nelson Mandela, for example, who was absolutely motivated by the greater good. And if you've ever read any of Nelson Mandela's work, he had a faith in the fundamental goodness of people. And his belief was that if you appeal to the fundamental goodness of people, that will be ultimately what will make the difference. Normally, at 1, we are very much into some sense of a higher purpose and meaning. We are into reform and activism. As a little example of somebody who knew they were a type 1 on the Enneagram, I did some work with Anita Roddick and The Body Shop. And I would say, all of her work was very much about trying to make business ethical, make business honorable. Yeah, that was the work fundamentally. As a leadership model here, I think it is about fundamentally being ethical somehow. The challenges that we face at type 1, if I was to name one of them, I think it's that often we place such a lot of pressure on our own personal high standards that we often will accuse ourselves of letting everybody down. We can be so perfectionistic that we make it difficult for ourselves. We become our own worst critic. But also the image that's coming to mind now is more of Atlas. Remember Atlas carrying the world on my shoulders? It's like at one, we often take on the role of being the one who's going to turn the organization around, turn the team around. It's up to me and it's on my shoulders. And again, with the Enneagram, this is all about making sure we're in balance. I was listening just to the end of the last session with Fee, and part of that balance, by the way, is making sure we're in balance physically in our body, in our heart, and in our head. The Enneagram is one of these systems that very much looks to support body, heart, and head. And at one, we often end up so much overcooking the head that we forget to drop down into our heart, and we also forget to look after ourselves physically as well. The meditation, I would say, at type 1 would be leading by example. How can I be leading by example right now? And in particular, when my team are going through all of the challenges that they're going through and all of the struggles that they're going through, I have to know at type 1 that I can't just tell people, for example, to practice resetting themselves, or tell people to recharge themselves on the weekend, or renew themselves, or go for that walk in the morning because it makes so much sense. We can't just tell people to do that if we're not doing it ourselves. It's the same principle would be, I think, with raising children. Again, same thing. You can't just tell them. You've got to see the example. So at one, the meditation would be, what is that example that I most need to embody, that would be so good for me to embody, and that would be so good for the team to witness from me? That would be an example here. So this is very sort of principle centered. Another good example, I think, of a type 1 on the Enneagram. If any of you have come across Stephen Covey's work, this was still very popular, but it really was hugely popular for a while with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He then wrote this book, Principle Centered Leadership. Principle Centered Leadership. Basically, leading through values, which is, if anybody is paying attention to British politics right now, leading by example is a rather big conversation right now, particularly in terms of number 10 and everything that's been going on in the last couple of years. Do we even need to lead by example, really? If we're just getting the job done, is that enough? That's the sort of conversation that's happening right now. And anybody who, would be sitting at type 1, I think, would be saying in the bigger picture, for the greater good, for the highest good, we must always lead by example. All right, so I'm just going to pause for a minute there and ask, is there anybody who would like to ask a question, and if so, in public, please just raise a hand and we'll have a quick chat, or I'll see if I can ask, I can look over at chat as well to see if there's anything here. And I see Marie. Hi, Marie.
Hi, thank you very much for that. And I've been very lucky to know the Enneagram for 20 years, or I learned about it 20 years ago, so it's brilliant to come back to it so many years after. Mm-hmm. And my question would be as well, for us as leader, we will have type 1s, or all the different types you are describing in our teams.
Yes. And
I would really like if you could add, to this description, how we should behave towards the one. Mm-hmm. As well as, what they are, and so how they like to be led, if you want, in a way that would really be helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. Well, I think, and especially with what we're looking at today, as well, Maria, I think it is vital that they will want some sort of mentoring from us. They will look for that. They normally enjoy a feeling of mentoring if we're in a position to be able to mentor, so we can really, we can listen to their sense of vision. We can honor the fact that they do have values. By the way, ones tend to keep a lot of this quite close to their chest. It's not that because they don't necessarily want to force this on everybody. But if you know that this is important to them, it's really good. And the one thing I would say, particularly for well-being, would be to encourage ones to remember to go out to play. At one, we're trying to make the world a better place. And sometimes the thing that gets in the way of making the world a better place is that we're trying to make the world a better place. And actually, at one, when we relax and don't try so hard, we become less stoic, less cold. We don't mean to be cold, but we can come across as cold, and we become more approachable as well. And I think that's important to say as well. Yeah. Great. Okay. And I'm so mindful I've got more to do. So let's but thank you, Maria. I'll keep going with that if I can for the next one. So we've got the reformer, the one that likes to make things better, a sense of a higher purpose. And the invitation here is something to do with what's that example that I need to embody, not just tell people about, but really embody and have that be my, one of my contributions to the team. Okay, now we'll go to 2, which you can see is called the helper. And the model that I'm going to look at here is called servant leadership. So, the helper, also sometimes called the giver or the servant, the Samaritan, the altruist, the coach, and the martyr. So I'll always add in a bit of drama. So, one, it was like the idealist, too many high standards, leaving people behind. And then with the helper, it's the martyr. We've got to make sure we're not overgiving. The life outlook of the helper is to make a contribution. I want to make a contribution somewhere. And who doesn't, frankly? But these are what we would call special flavors of the types, okay? We've all got, by the way, much more in common than not. So we've all got a lot of this in us. The social role is the helper to do something helpful. The driver is to be helpful. Okay, and I often say that they're very relational. Type 2s, very relational indeed. They are actually called one of the heart types, 2, 3, and 4. They put their heart into their work. They are the type that are most likely to ask you, how are you? And actually want to hear your answer and would want to make the time to hear your answer as well. Okay, so they're very interpersonal. They're very into team building. Servant leadership is, I think, the model here. Great leaders must first become good servants. This is a model that was created by Robert Greenleaf, the servant leadership model. He wrote, "The servant leader is servant first. It begins with a natural feeling that one wants to serve first, as opposed to wanting power, influence, fame, or wealth." And the work here is to want to serve somehow. So therefore, we won't put ourselves at the top of the pyramid. We will more put ourselves in the middle of the circle. Yeah. The challenge here, I would say, is that if we're not careful, we get stuck in our role and we become such a helper that we will overhelp and at some point, quite frankly, in our efforts to serve, we will experience the need to be helped. And at type 2, we're often better at giving than we are at receiving. It's more our preferences to give. Receiving feels awkward. We don't want to be a burden. We don't want to take up people's time, their resources. We would much rather be helping rather than actually receiving. If we give our all consistently, there may be a point where we just run out of energy at some point. And that becomes, that will become very, very difficult for us. So the great work at 2 is to make sure that you think about what is your support team and how do you help yourself. Type 2s are the type that, when you're on the aeroplane and you get the instruction of how to use the oxygen mask, and you get told that, put the oxygen mask on yourself first and then on the person next, onto your child afterwards. Type 2s are one of the types that would hear that and say, yeah, I'm never going to do it that way. I'm going to put that mask firstly on my child and then I'll get around to me. Yeah, it's that sort of a thing. It just doesn't feel right to put yourself first. It feels almost illegal to do it. And that's why you work with something like the Enneagram, to try and understand actually a bigger picture for why occasionally it is good to put yourself first. Why? Because others are going to benefit and you're going to be an even greater helper if you do this. A meditation at type 2 would definitely be something like self-care on a personal level. How am I looking after myself? How am I caring for myself? When do I ever really do that for me? Am I even on my own to-do list? In fact, when I look at my calendar, is there any me time in there? I mean to go out for that walk, and I will go out for that walk when the space appears, but it doesn't appear. You have to put it in for yourself. That's the sort of work. On another level, these Type 2, I would say, this is a very interesting thing. I think when I think of Wales and England for a minute, England is recognized sociologically as being an individualistic culture. And as an individualistic culture, we're very much into the whole sort of individualism thing. And I think that for me, my experience of Wales and my understanding sociologically is that it's more of a collectivist culture. There is much more of a sense of we and the sense of stronger together, for example. These are very important values that belong more to the collectivist type cultures. In my experience, working with people who are leaders in leadership positions and they're type 2, they often can be quite frustrated that there isn't enough emphasis on culture, relationships, and really the heart of the organization. And this is I think, made even harder in the individualistic cultures. But a big question you could ask as a meditation here would be at 2, how do I manage the heart of my team? Yeah. What even is the heart of my team? Does my team have a heart? How would I describe that? And how can I make sure I'm looking after the heartbeat of my team? And to answer that question, you normally have to go to your own heart to be able to answer it. You can't always answer that rationally and logically. It's more of an intuitive thing. It's a felt sense. Also, you probably can't put heart of the team on a profit and loss, sheet. And unless your accountant has a strong bit of 2 in them, they're going to probably look at that and go, what's that mean? And is it very necessary? But the heart of the team is what makes sure the bottom line will happen. So we need to do that, and that's important. Okay. I'd like to just pause again here, if I may, for a moment. Anybody want to ask anything about point 2 or make a comment about point 2? Craig, thank you for your reflection in the chat. I appreciate that. Thank you. And anybody want to ask anything here at point 2? Craig, yes, thank you. Hello, Craig.
Hi there. Hope you can hear me okay. I'm outside.
Yes.
Some stuff going on in the background. Yeah, just a quick one. I guess without jumping ahead across all of them, but recognizing that there's probably aspects of our leadership in a variety of different of these things. I guess how important is it to understand your personal circumstance and the influence that would have on the Enneagram as well?
Yeah.
Because obviously, with what's gone on with the backdrop of COVID and the pandemic and our own personal circumstances, I feel that has changed me quite considerably.
Yes.
In terms of where I perhaps were positioned on the Enneagram before COVID and now during and after.
Thank you, Craig. Great question. Thank you. The general feeling is with the Enneagram, and I want to emphasize, we're still really learning about the Enneagram. This is a very curious thing that it even exists, to be really honest. I mean, I'd been studying psychology and philosophy for 20-something years before I even heard of it. So it's flown under the radar. So I just want to say everything I share comes with that spirit of we're learning. But one of the things we've definitely addressed is that really in the Enneagram, it seems like each person has their own level of health. And in that level of health, like at 2, for example, the level of health at 2 would be, I love giving, I love helping, and I'm a good receiver. And I allow myself that time for me. So there's this sense of, you make good balanced choices. You've also balanced in your 3 centers. So you can think things through well, your heart's open and physically you're looking after yourself. Now, all of that, I think, is entirely possible when life's going okay. And then the stress hits, and that's when we would then go out of health, if you like. So the work is, the healthier we are, almost like the less of a type we become. It's like we become less fixed, and more spacious in our choices. And we know our preferences. We'll know, well, okay, I can't help it. I want to make the world a better place. I'm driven to do that. And you're not meant to fight that. Actually, what you're meant to do is see if you can find a healthier way to do that. So as a one, for example, I'm thinking of, inconvenient truth. Do you remember the inconvenient truth with, what was his name? My goodness. In the chat, can you help me out for a minute? Who's the politician who came up with inconvenient truth?
It's Al Gore. It was Al Gore.
Thank you. So Al Gore, I think, demonstrated a lot of that type 1 energy where it's like, look, this is the inconvenient truth. The planet is fundamentally dying. Just thought you'd like to know. Now, when he was sharing it like that, we were sort of like, oh, wow, we should take it on board. Once the finger came out and it started to wag at us and we got told off over and over again as he got more sort of like passionate, that became difficult. He alienated his audience quite a lot. Justifiably so, you could say that he was angry, yes, but there's a skillfulness to this that we need to do. And sometimes with type 1s, they wag that finger so much, they alienate the people they're trying to help. At 2, we're so into helping others, we almost are lost when there's no one to help, and also when it's actually our turn to be helped. So what we're trying to do is just ease off a little bit on the sort of almost dogmatic way we can go about it. And Craig, absolutely to your point, I would say COVID potentially made everybody probably more unhealthy initially in their type. And we had to, if you knew about the Enneagram, and then you'd work with the Enneagram to say, right, how can I get healthier? But the default would have been would have been to have got too unhealthy. That happened to me. I can tell you about that actually now, because we'll go to point 3, which is where I am. Type 3 is called the achiever, and I've called the path or here Success Intelligence. And I've called it that because I created a company called Success Intelligence. And we're a heart type, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment as well. Type 3, the achiever, the sometimes called the doer, the worker, the performer, the status seeker. All right, the status seeker, the one who wants to be seen winning and performing and shining. And that's a problem. Okay, that becomes a problem after a while. The strength of 3 is I want to do my personal best. So a little bit like at 1, I've got a high superego. I want to do my best. I want to achieve. I want to stand out. I will provide a very high work rate. I'll be task focused, work smart with a can-do attitude and a winning mentality, and I'll get the job done for sure. And I can get lost in busyness at 3. That's what happened to me. As soon as COVID hit, like I was like coaching, various people, and I was just packing the diary full of how can I help these people and what can I do for them? What can I do for you? That was my approach. And, after a while, because some of my clients are dealing with quite big global issues, I was just exhausted. Completely and utterly exhausted. And actually, one of the things that really helped me after a while was to start doing things like cooking again. Actually, I remember one day just cooking this really lovely mushroom risotto. And, with risotto, it's like you can't take your eye off a risotto. You've got to give it your full attention. And somehow just cooking a risotto instead of trying to work out the global dynamics of a company somewhere just brought me back to myself. Another thing was actually just going into my little garden patch and just putting my hands in the soil, just simplifying everything was really, really helpful for me. So the thing at 3 as the achiever is that we at 3, and I'm a 3, we get rewarded for our dysfunction. And our dysfunction at 3 is workaholism. So, the old thing, if you want somebody to do something, ask a busy person, they'll be the ones who can probably do it. If you've got any sort of 3 energy in you, you get rewarded for your workaholism, for overdoing it, essentially. And if you're not careful, you go missing in action. Yeah. And what you need to do after a while is to sort of think about, it's not about how much I can do today that matters. Actually, what really matters is more, it's what is my enlightened action for today? If I was just to pick one action for today, what would that be? And whatever that one action is, that's the one that today mustn't get lost in this pile of busyness that I have. As a 3, for example, I used to have these laws, these rules that I lived by, like once the work is done, I can go out to play. Yeah, it took me about 20 years to work out that the work's not ever done. So I didn't go out to play. It's like, oh my God, I'm being run. But this is what I mean by the operating system. I'm being run by a rule that doesn't exist in the universe. It just exists in my head. But it's the operating system of 3. And the Enneagram, by the way, isn't saying don't achieve. It's saying, yeah, achieve, but do it in an enlightened way. What is the enlightened task for today? So, for example, a meditation at 3 could be something like, what is success today? What is success today? Or what is real success today? Or for the team, you could ask yourself, how do I manage the success of my team? When a team doesn't know about itself very well, then what tends to happen is when it doesn't know what success is, it tends to compensate by becoming manic, busy, and hyperactive. Whereas when you know what success is and you're all talking about it together properly, you'll become less manic, less unnecessarily busy, and less hyperactive. Okay, I'm looking at my time. I'm going to just keep going for a little bit, if I may, because I've got to get all 9 types in. You can't leave a type out in the Enneagram. It's like, that's also illegal. So let's go to type 4. And if we may, just let's take a moment and take a look at type 4 on the Enneagram. This is the type that's called the Individualist. And I've called them a chief creative officer here. Everybody's creative on the Enneagram, but at 4, it matters to us that we're creative. We identify with creativity at 4. We love to be creative. The bohemian, the mystic, the artist, the misfit, the one who wonders, do I really belong? Yeah. Their life outlook, I'm trying to find my place in the scheme of things. I want to find a place that I'd like to belong, but my social role is the individualist. I actually work quite hard to be a bit different to everybody else. I'm often a little bit original and a little bit wonky. I don't really feel like I'm necessarily like a straight line. The path of my life feels more like a scribble than a straight line. And above all, I'm really looking for that real me often. The driver at 4 is to find myself and express myself. And it's very interesting, this, by the way, when you do the Enneagram, is making sure, are we creating a culture that allows people to express themselves? That's quite an interesting question. And one way to check is, do you have any type 4s in your culture? Because if you don't, that might be a tip that actually everybody's sort of got their suits on rather than their, like we're dressed up for work rather than coming to work as the person we most want to be. It is about, I often think of 4 as being something to do with authenticity, creating creative workplaces. And I would say that one of the things you could say at 4 is, if you were really going to make a good meditation out of this, it would be something like, how am I managing the authenticity of my team? If you want to take it even a step further, it would be like, how am I managing the spiritual DNA of my team? Do we know who we are? We may have all sorts of stakeholders who are telling us how we should be, and that's very nice of them to do that. That's what stakeholders are meant to do. But we are the ones who ultimately decide who we are. And we need to think carefully about that. Yeah. Who are we? How are we going to define success? Yeah. How would we like to help people? What are our values? We need to work on that. And that takes a lot of courage. And that's about working with our own DNA fundamentally. Okay, so being really authentic, but it's also, I would say, at 4, it's, as a little example of how 4 works, you look for influences of 4. One of the companies that I work with is, they're a law firm. They're the 3rd biggest law firm in the world. When you go into their big buildings, you sort of pretty much think, hey, I'm in a law firm. It just has that sort of feeling, except that there are works of art on the walls. And the person who's put those works of art on the walls is a type 4 on the Enneagram. And they've done it because they understand that you're meant to bring a bit of heart and soul into the workplace. This shouldn't just be about getting a job done. This should be about expressing your heart and soul. And creativity is good for the soul, and it's good for lawyers, and it's good for everybody, actually. So that's the sort of flavor you're looking for at 4. I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to pause again, and we can have a little bit of a time for question, but I'd like to go to type 5, if I may, on the Enneagram. So let's take a little look at the diagram again here. So we're moving, by the way, into the head types here now with the Investigator, and then the Loyalist, and then the Enthusiast. Head types, heart types, body types. Everybody's got a head and a heart and a body. We call them the types because this is not often like their lead center, and it's the center that when they're at their healthiest, they work with the best, and when they're not healthy, it's the center they forget about. It goes out of balance. And that would be true now as we look at the head type and at inspiration. I've just called it inspiration. So the Investigator, they're sometimes called the observer, the analyst, the specialist, the problem solver, the expert, actually. They often demonstrate a great expertise at something. Their life outlook is to investigate, to understand, to see, and to know. Their social role, they normally love to research stuff and to be an expert at something. Their driver is to master something. They want to be able to master something. And they are the type that will do their very best to master something, but they often feel thwarted by the fact that there's still so much to know. Type 5s are the type that would be most likely to do a PhD on the left leg of a sheep, because nobody else has done that yet. And then obviously it could be the front left leg of the sheep, and not just sheep. That's too general. You'd want to pick a particular brand of sheep to do that as well. And then you'd want to cross-reference that against something else as well. I wonder if there are more grains of sand on the earth than there are stars in the sky. Yeah. I wonder if we'll ever know. That's the sort of thing we think about at 5. 5s are having a fantastic time in the world right now, in that most of the technology in the world is run by 5s. None of us really know how the technology works, do we? But it does seem to work, and most of it has been worked out by 5s. Science, that type of thinking is very much there. Research and development, you get lots and lots of 5s working hard here. I did some work at Google, for example, which is a very 5 organization, particularly in research and development. Marketing is not such a 5 culture. It's more of a 7 culture. Marketing is enthusiasm. I'm going to share with you what we're doing. Quite interestingly, at Google, the research and development team are so into the investigation that they sometimes forget to tell the rest of the organization what they've invented. So the general feeling at Google is that actually research and development has invented the future. They just haven't told us what it is because they forget to tell us. So the marketing team within Google then have to go and knock on the door of the research and development team and actually say, hello, would you come out, please? Don't get all lost up in your head here. We need you in the world as well, and we need you to tell us what exactly you've invented. Same thing happened at IBM. IBM, they've got several Nobel Prize winners who just invented all sorts of amazing stuff and made all sorts of amazing discoveries, and often just forgot to tell people about it. So hugely insightful, very well researched, fabulous problem solvers, but you must remember to be engaged. I would say, if we were broadening this one out a bit more, it would be to say, as a leader, where am I getting my inspiration from? if I'm really serious about learning about leadership, who am I getting my where am I getting my inspiration from? What are my wells of inspiration? Where do I go to for inspiration? And have I sat down next to my well of inspiration recently and dropped a bucket into the well and brought up some lovely living water to drink from? That's what we're about here. And we could say, for example, then as a team, what inspires my team? And how can we be working to make sure that we inspire the team? Yeah. So, and that the team feels inspired, and that the team maybe has some growth and learning opportunities as well. That would be an example. I wonder if we could just pause here for a moment. If there's anybody who would like to make a comment at all about 3, 4, and 5. Well, okay, great. So we can keep going. Thank you. All right. So let's go to 6. We're into the head type still. I'm going to call this one thought leadership. 6 is everybody thinks, everybody understands that thinking is important, and at the same time, often, especially in leadership positions, we often feel like we're too busy to think. With Success Intelligence, one of our mantras is that leaders aren't paid to be busy, they're paid to think. And that actually, if the leader isn't doing the thinking, then who is? Who's doing the thinking? And this is rather important for all of us. And at 6, we're called the Loyalist, the Guardian, the Troubleshooter, the Safe Pair of Hands, but also the Skeptic. It's an interesting one, this, the Skeptic. Our life outlook is we're looking for something to believe in and a cause that we will dedicate ourselves to. Now, but the fact that we're looking for that means we're really going to test our potential causes, the things we want to believe in. And I think it's that testing quality, which means that often at 6 we can be a bit suspicious of things and rather skeptical. And it's a good thing, again, in the Enneagram. In the Enneagram, there's no such thing as a bad thing. It's more just, is it in balance or not? Anybody who hasn't the capacity to be skeptical, is probably at a disadvantage in life. You need a bit of skepticism every now and then. You just don't want to have to be always skeptical. I did something for Radio 4, All in the Mind, the BBC radio program called All in the Mind, which was about psychology. And I was asked to comment on, is it better to be a pessimist or an optimist? And the point I made is you don't want to be either. You want to have the capacity to be optimistic, and you want the capacity to be pessimistic. You don't want to be stuck in either. If you are, then there's blind spots. I would say we are looking at mindful leadership, and we are also looking at, this is a book that I don't know if any of you have come across, called Time to Think. Time to Think, Listening to Ignite the Human Mind, and by Nancy Klein. I think there's this sense of how can we make sure we're making space to think, and are we as a team thinking our best thoughts? A little bit like at 3, where I said, it's not so much about how much you do that matters. What matters is that you, what matters is that you actually are doing the thing that matters. That's the key. I would say at 6, I remember once coaching somebody who was head of they were in charge of the world for their business, and they were one of the things that he did was making one wise decision a day. One wise decision a day. That was his work, to do one wise decision a day. And it might not sound like much, but when you do that, every day, 5 days a week, you know, inside a year, that's 200 wise decisions. And when you think as a leader, you often have the capacity to make an impact and to have influence. If you are making a wise decision 5 times a week, at some point that's going to show. And it's important. The other thing to do is galvanizing the thinking of the team. How am I managing the thinking of the team here at SYX and making sure that we are working well together as a result? So that's a good one. Okay, so let's take a look at 7. 7 is the enthusiast. And I popped in here the growth mindset at 7. 7s are often the entrepreneurs. They are the producer, the energizer, the pace setter, the multitasker, which is great when things are going well, but honestly, not so great when, when you've got too many tasks that you're multitasking with. Your life outlook at 7 is, it's interesting, it's to choose one's life and to be free. There's a great sense at 7 of wanting to be free. Everybody wants to be free, but this is something at 7, it's big. It's about choices. The social role at 7 is the enthusiast. They show up with an energy and an enthusiasm that gets things done. It's a can-do energy, and it's infectious. And an example of it would be I worked with Virgin for about 4 years running a leadership program there. So somebody like a Richard Branson, think of that type of a character. That type of enthusiasm. There was a lot of positivity in the workplace. Positivity is a good thing, except if no one is allowed to be honest. If you're only allowed to be positive, then that's a problem. Yeah. So that would be like one of the shadows of positivity, you might say. They are the pace setter. They are the ones that like to get things done. But you've got to manage your pace at 7. You mustn't go too fast for your team. I remember once working with a leader it was a member of his team actually who said, look, we get that you're in the engine of the team and you're leading the way, and we're thrilled that you do. But we don't feel like we're anywhere near the engine of the team with you. We feel like we're in carriage 10, 11 or 12, way back down the line. And we really feel you're going like you've gone around a bend and we don't even know there's a bend yet. You're going so fast for us, we feel out of touch with you. So we have to find a way at 7. We've got all of these great gifts of being super focused, high energy, fun to be around, lots of possibility thinking, wanting to grow. But we've got to make sure also that we don't overdo it, because if we do at 7, we start to become out of focus and become overly busy. Entrepreneurial mindset is the key here, I would say. And I would say the leadership meditation here would be, bearing in mind, what we've been looking at for the last 3 days in your conference, would be growth. How am I managing my growth? And also, how am I managing the growth of my team? Yeah. That would be a good question to look at. Continuous growth. How am I growing as a leader, and how am I managing the growth of my team? That would be a meditation. I'm going to pause here. Let's take the diagram down again. So I think we're doing just about okay on time. I don't know about you, but I often feel like with the Enneagram, it feels like I'm laying out a buffet with so much on the table that it can become a little bit, overwhelming. I mean, what I'm running through here is a 3-day program if you want it to be. But I think what I'm trying to do right now is give you takeaways, but also then just introduce you to what the Enneagram can be when you want to have a conversation where you're getting to know each other better and appreciate each other more. One of the things I do love about the Enneagram is it's not trying to fix anybody. It's going to help everyone try and be healthier. It's full of diversity in it. In fact, actually, one of the things I've been using the Enneagram for quite a lot in the last few years as well, actually, has been looking at the subject of racism, working with the Enneagram and racism, because the Enneagram embodies and embraces diversity in a wonderful way, and it can often help us tackle some of those root causes of racism in an interesting way. For example, at type 5, if you're an investigator, you've probably done the research in biology where you realize that actually the human race is a single race. And that's rather good to know. You know, you care about the subject enough to actually research it rather than just have an opinion about it. Anyway, you know, that's the sort of thing you can use the Enneagram for. Anybody got anything they would like to ask at this point about 6 or 5 or any of the other numbers? 7. Got 2 more to go. 8 and 9. We're okay. Thank you. I really appreciate. I think, like, often I know for me that, like, the less that's said, it's easier to ask a question. When there's so much, it can be quite difficult to ask a question or make a comment. But let's go to the challenger. Let's take a little look at the challenger for a minute. So here we are. We're into the challenger. Strength-based leadership, I called this one, because there is a model called Strength-Based Leadership. Marcus Buckingham wrote a book called Now Discover Your Strengths. And what a good thing to do, you know, to acknowledge our strengths. Not least, by the way, because often we do a lot of work on identifying our weaknesses. You know, and it's important that we do, but sometimes we don't quite, you know, get the balance right. I remember actually working with somebody once who had just had a leadership performance appraisal done, and they had there was 28 items on the appraisal, and they got a poor mark for 2 of them, and they were devastated. And I said, well, yeah, look, you know, we need to look at those 2 things, but can we just start by acknowledging that there's 26 good scores here? Interestingly, this person was a type 1, so, you know, they were had these great high standards, and the 2 scores they didn't get weren't very good. And they weren't terrible scores. They just weren't perfect. So they weren't really high, but this became a bit of an issue. I did also point out to this person that if I gave my wife if I had to fill in a 28-point test, you know, or a bit of feedback from my wife, I'd be thrilled to get 26 right and only have to work on 2 things. That would be amazing. But so there's a balance. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a balance here. It's good to know about our weaknesses, of course, but also sometimes our blind spot is we don't know our strengths, and it's good to know what they are. The challenger is their life outlook is looking for a challenge. Their social role is to be up for that challenge, identify a challenge that matters and go for it. Their driver is to be strong, and that's fabulous. But the key is you have to work out what being strong means. Yeah, and that's important. Because we may have to change our mind about what it means to be strong. For example, at 1, we might think that being stoic is strong. Yeah, but every now and then it might be good to share an emotion. That might be what it means to be strong. At 2, being strong might be being vulnerable enough to receive. At 3, being strong might be choosing to take some time off from work and sticking to it. That might be your definition of strength there, for example. So it's working that out. Steve Jobs, let's make a dent in the universe. That's the type 8 energy. and it's fabulous to be around when it's empowering, and it often is, but it can also be intimidating. 8s have to be really careful how they go about things, because they are strong characters. In most of my leadership work, the people who I've coached the most at sort of a CEO type level, they are mostly type 8s. It isn't because they do the job better than others. It's because they have the appetite to do it. They are up for the challenge. So they often take on the big challenges and want to do them. I say it doesn't mean they're good at them. It just means that they've got the appetite for them. I think an example of a great type 8 person in life, now this person I wouldn't know if they are for sure a type 8, but their energy was that of an 8, would be somebody like a Martin Luther King. And his book, Where Do We Go From Here, for example, lays down a challenge for society. And that's, I think, what he did over and over again, was he was offering a challenge. He knew how to think big, and he laid down a challenge to all of us as to how to live, and we were inspired by that. He actually wrote a book called The Strength to Love, as well, and he talked a lot about the difference between power, the love of power, and love itself, and how he felt that love was the greatest power, the moral compass of the universe, actually, and for humanity. At 8, the meditation would be something like, how am I managing my own strengths? And also, how am I managing the strengths of my team? Yeah, how am I managing my strengths? And also, how am I managing the strengths of my team? So it's important. So I'm just reading Matthew. I see elements of myself in quite a few of these types. Yeah, the model is helpful in thinking, how can I capitalize on strengths and recognize and adjust to mitigate some of the downsides of the behaviors? Yeah, so the first thing to do is when you take a test and you find the operating system of your ego, once you've done that, you're set on a path of growth. And once you're on that path of growth, you are going to visit all of these numbers. That's the key. The idea isn't just to find your number and stick to it. You actually, for example, if you look at the model right now, you see, let's take 8. You see that 8, the challenger, has a line that goes to 2. Now 2 is a heart type, and their center of power is in their heart. 8s often have to cultivate a greater sense of being less defended and more open-hearted in order to be even more powerful. It's one of the reasons why we could listen to a Martin Luther King, because he was in his heart as he was laying down his big challenges for us. 8s have a line to 5 as well, and the 8s have the big picture. The 5 has the microscope, and so they'll go into the detail, and sometimes we need that detail. So I'm just giving you an example here how you can work with all the other numbers, and they're all related to each other, and you can work with them in that way. So it's a good way to do it. And it is, Lucy, a self-awareness tool. It is that. It's the whole point. The more aware we are of ourselves, the more we have choices, and that's a good thing. If we're not aware of ourselves, then we're just in the autopilot. But at 8, managing the strengths of your team is the key. Okay, that's the key. Let's go to 9. 9 is called the Peacemaker, and I put here activism as their path. They are the mediator, the diplomat, the conductor, the one that can conduct, and the dreamer. Their outlook is to live a wonderful life. They dream of a better life and of a better world. Their social role is the peacemaker, the mediator. Their driver is to be calm, if you like, and to hold a sense of calmness. And all of that doesn't necessarily sound very active, but when and activism is the great balancer here at 9, because the tendency of being the peacemaker is that we withdraw from life in order to find our peace, whereas actually the work is to move into life and be an activist and do the work and get involved in the mess of life. And ultimately, it's to find a peace that passes all understanding. Not a peace that you make, but a peace that already exists. So the key at 9 is to you will, when you know a type 9 in your life, you sense their sense of peacefulness. You sense their poise. 9s, interestingly, are often athletes because they have this capacity for being engaged in something which requires an enormous amount of repetition. And they're okay with that. For the rest of us, it would drive us crazy, but they're all right with it. A public example of a type 9 in sport would be Roger Federer. Roger Federer has this extraordinary poise. When he plays tennis, he doesn't look like he's trying. There's an effortlessness to it. There's a great sense of calm. Have you ever seen him lose his temper? Actually, have you ever seen him sweat? And by the way, when he wins and he's asked, how do you feel about your victory? He'll often say something like, very good, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for asking. Like, it's very peaceful. It's like, and the balance here is to be peaceful, but also to be alive and in your activism. And I would say one of the great meditations on leadership at 9 is, where is my presence needed today? Where is my presence needed today? There are so many places I could be. There are so many conversations I could be having. Where is my presence needed today? Yeah. Who do I need to go and visit? I know that's been difficult in recent times, but at least, or who do I need to call? Who do I need to literally spend time with? Where is my presence most needed today? Often the feeling is I need to be in several places all at once, and we all get that. But here it's literally, where is my presence most needed today? That's my activism. That's how I'm going to try and help bring a little bit more heaven onto earth, how I'm going to try and bring something good into the world and into my workplace. So this is how we work with the Enneagram. These types of meditations, these types of conversations that belong to all of us. These are the points of the Enneagram. But then we have the types where we really do get into looking after ourselves in a good way, looking after our well-being, making sure we're balanced in our body, in our heart, and our head, and being what in the Enneagram would be called being a whole human being. How I can be a whole human being. I know we've recommended the book by Maria Taylor, who is a great friend of the Academy Wales, and who I think was the first person to even offer courses on the Enneagram through the Academy. So I recommend her short book wholeheartedly. Thank you for that. And then a book that you might be interested in would be a book like The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Riso and Hudson, R-I-S-O and Hudson. The reason I recommend this is because it has the broad picture. It's got a very friendly layout. It's not a lot of the books on the Enneagram they're so full of insight. You almost want to sit with a paragraph for a year rather than there's almost too much. This is better. And also what I like about it is that there's also you can you can do a test at the beginning of each chapter to see how much this type influences you and whether indeed this is even your type. So I quite like that. We will find that we resonate with a lot of the types. So therefore, we need to do a little bit of an investigation to find our first primary type. Once we've got the primary type, as I say, we're going to visit all the other ones, but it's quite good to get that primary one down. All right. Is there anybody who'd like to... sorry, what was the name of the book? First book again? Oh, well, I think we've got this one, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, and then Maria Taylor's book is... It's in your delegate pack, I think. I'm sorry, I can't remember the title of it. I think it's something like What Type Are You even? But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know that. Maybe I can ask the team to make sure you get that. And especially when I know you're about to go into a facilitation, into your facilitators group. So hopefully by then we'll know what that is. I think the Enneagram to transactional analysis. Oh, Deborah, that's a good one. No, I can't think of a direct book that links the Enneagram to TA. But I would say that there is one particular Hornevian model, which is mentioned in this one, which acknowledges that we will tend to approach things more from an adult space or a parent space or a child space. So there's reference to that in this one. But it's reference. It's not I haven't got a full one there for you. That's a great question. I don't know. Anybody else got any comment you'd like to make or any thoughts? One of the things I do like about the Enneagram, by the way, at the end of the day is I think you could not, if you wanted to, you could not ever look at the Enneagram again. You could say, well, that was nice. That was a nice lens. I don't need to look at that, but I'll keep the meditations. And I would say those meditations would serve any leader well. And that's what I like about the Enneagram is that the Enneagram isn't meant to be the star of the show. The Enneagram is just the tool that you're using to look at something with. So you're not having to sign up to some sort of methodology or a church, it's not like that. It's a tool that's very, very useful for when you want to broaden out your thoughts about something or hone in on something from a different angle. Okay, I'm just going to give it, how do you manage a 9, please? Yeah, all right, just that, thank you. It's a good question because at 9, you might want to manage a 9 because they are disengaged. They have withdrawn. And often you don't necessarily know when a 9 has withdrawn yet because they're not angry. They're in fact very pleasant about everything, but you just are beginning to see that something's not getting done or that somehow they're not there. 9s have a way of being there but not being there. So you have to be direct. You have to go direct and you have to say, we need to talk about this properly. And after that, you may well think that what you said got through and it appeared to get through and everybody was nodding in agreement. But the thing to do would be to follow it up inside a few days to make sure it's not forgotten about. So it's stepping forward into the space of the bubble that the 9 might have got themselves in. We have a phrase called cloud 9. At 9, we often like to be in cloud 9. And sometimes you might have to go up, get the ladder and get up to cloud 9 and talk to them about how can I get you back down to earth and get you present and available and ready to do the work again. That's the sort of thing you often have to do. What is my type? Thank you, Chris. That's amazing. Yeah, Renee Taylor and Jenny Williams. What is my type? That's the book.